Welcome to The Middlemen. I'm Tom Limongello, and I'm here with Todd Sawicki. We, as middlemen, live at the intersection of media and e-commerce, and we would like for you to join us in our discussions where we turn that chaotic intersection into your comfort zone. This is a welcome back for us from Labor Day. We recorded this prior to Labor Day, but I think from listening to it, I got the feeling that this was a really interesting, pivotal moment in understanding all the recordings that we've done, all the podcast episodes we've done previously, the retail media series, which was 3 episodes, the episode we did on Oracle. All of those were focused on the shift in the advertising market from third-party data to first-party data. But we did it from the background and the perspective of a retailer or a publisher, where it was all about getting their transactions set up so that those could be valuable for monetization and for sales attribution. But what we didn't talk about was how do brands live in this new world? And I think that's why this discussion with Jonathan Mendez from Neuralift is going to be very interesting. And you have a long history with him.
Jonathan's background in online advertising, and he really started early in his career looking at how you leverage third-party data and optimize for that, is really interesting. And I think also an important point is it speaks to the radical shift that's going on in the online advertising and online marketing ecosystem from third-party data to first-party data. We cannot understate how big a change this is, where almost all on advertising and marketing was built around third-party data, and Oracle's business, to refer to that and listen to the story of what that was about, which is Oracle shutting down its Oracle advertising technology business, which was doing hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, but it was built entirely around third-party data and helping businesses market using third-party data. And that's going away. And I think Oracle sees the writing on the wall that with that business going away, meaning third-party data targeting, shifting entirely to first-party, they just gave up and said, you know what, we got better things to do with our time. And one of that radical shift actually goes back. It didn't just start this year or last year. It goes back before the pandemic, and Jonathan's story, that radical shift goes back before the pandemic, and Jonathan's story speaks to that. And he got into the business of helping brands build out CDPs, right? That was really the beginnings of this first party data story, was how do brands do that? They put CDPs in place. Jonathan built a business around helping brands do that. And then once he got in there, he realized that's great that the brands have now started aggregating all this first-party customer data, but it turns out that doesn't help you very much. And then you have to figure out, how do I use that data? How do I build that data into segments or cohorts? How do I export that data and transact on that from a media or marketing standpoint? And it turns out that the CDPs are great for storing data and pushing that data out to other platforms, but they're not very good or make it very easy to segment and build those audiences that you want to market to. And so Jonathan's got a new startup, which is really meant to solve that problem using AI to help make it really easy for these brands to build those segments in really interesting ways, leveraging AI. It's a really cool product. Jonathan's had a chance to walk us through that product. And so it really, I think, speaks to a class of products and tools you're going to see emerge to help brands interact and do more with first-party data and react to the world that's changing very quickly, where they're going to have to, if they want to do online marketing, they're going to have to do it around and leveraging first-party data. And so that's really what Jonathan's story is about today, is you brands, this is your future, and you're going to work with tools like the ones that Jonathan's building.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people like me who worked more on the retailer side more recently, we were pushing and selling personalization, but the truth is that's not really the retailer's job. It's more likely the brand is going to have to take their data and say, this is what I want to do with these types of cohorts and these segments. So I think your point about this is the time when that other side of the marketplace lights up. And so I'm excited to allow the whole middleman community to listen to what Jonathan has to say. We want to welcome Jonathan Mendez, who's currently at Neuralift, and we wanted to really get to what his journey has been in the customer segmentation space, because I think you have a lot of really interesting companies that you've been in, and those have all informed where you are now. So can you tell us your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. This is great to talk shop with the middlemen. So for me, it's always been about first party data and segmentation. To do that, I go even back before I got into tech. I had built an e-commerce company called vitaminlab.com, and we acquired customers from search. The
I hope you kept that domain. That domain would probably be worth a lot right now.
I still have the domain. I
There you
do.
go.
Yeah, yes, but I unfortunately let go of multivitamins.com, which I saw some years ago was sold for $40,000, which was one of those.
Could have been a nice car.
Yep, yes, probably worth more than the 240 domains I still have combined.
Wow.
But with search, people are self-segmenting immediately. When you get into a search engine and you put a keyword into the search engine as a query, you've immediately segmented yourself, and the whole search index works that way, right? It's matching based on a rule. That rule is the query. And when you come from search to a website, like we had to buy something back in the old days, Google used to be pass that keyword along to you. And so you could know that somebody was coming to your site looking for multivitamins versus looking for vitamin B12, for example. And so that was a really powerful kind of segmentation technique to use to improve conversion rates and show people what they're coming for, what's relevant to them. When I joined Offermatica, they had been using that same type of technique around patient and most of all looking at all of the data. And what Offermatica did was we would look at everybody coming to the site, and then we would slice them up. People who came in the morning, see how they performed. People who came in the evening, see how they performed. People who came from paid search versus organic search, right? You'd have all these different segments of people that you could look at. You could see performance. And then based on the performance, and there's always differentiation of that performance based on how you want to slice up the audience and the visitors, you could start to get ideas for what North America did incredibly well is A/B testing, multivariate testing, and targeted content, or what they call personalization now. And so when I came in very early, I had the search background. They were doing that in session, in site. So they were doing recommendations. And what I helped do is bring that into landing pages and then, of course, home pages and really everything from search. And this was about 2006, 2007 when search was really taking off commercially. And so I came in to help get brands successful doing that. And everything was, as I said, we would look at how people got to the site. We would look at the keywords that they were using. We would look at the performance metric. Everything we were always optimizing to conversion rate. And that technology did incredibly well by really creating the market for testing, but testing is really about segmentation too. And so that was my beginning of first party data, because all of that data, again, this was site behavioral data as they call it now, or behavioral data. There are segments within that entire data set that show themselves, right? When you look at the results and when you're able to segment those results by different behaviors. So that was what we did at Offermatica. Obviously proved incredibly successful, required by Omniture and then Adobe, and the product is still out there as Adobe Target and doing incredibly well. So I think going back to the original point is with segmentation, you want to use all of the data you have at your disposal to understand who your customers are, what's important to them, what's relevant to them. And with what's done in CRM systems or even now within CDPs or the data warehouse, you are using data minimization techniques by doing a SQL query. So you're saying, okay, I have all this data, but this column and this column or this feature are the three most important things to create my segment. And that may be true, but those are typically KPIs or metrics or something else that doesn't tell you what's relevant to those people. And that's why I think conversion rates have been stuck at 3% generally for e-commerce for the last decade plus, is because everyone now segments it through that manner. And I think it's wrong.
One thing to continue your journey to bring up, for those who are not aware, I went from Offermatica and started a company called YieldBot, which really was a play in the shopper marketing world. And it's not necessarily perfect analogy for retail media, but it definitely starts to begin, I think, what we now think of as retail media. And so it'd be good to understand the story of YieldBot as well.
So the genesis of YieldBot was really came out of Offermatica. Before we got acquired, we had started trying to optimize display ads in a similar way on site with the first party data from the retailer or from the publisher. And we did a lot of publisher work at Allformatica too. I don't want to discount that. We did work around content engagement. We used to call it content merchandising. So personalization just to get higher engagement rates, more page views. And the idea for YieldBot was, what if you could, instead of drive people to the landing page based on a keyword, you could take the landing page to the people based on a keyword and serve it out, or serve an element of it, the headline or the call to action or something. And and the cost of actually serving it and the cost of media with the rise of exchanges meant that you could do this relatively inexpensively. It used to be, you want to buy a display ad, it was $20 CPM and you had to figure, but now it was 5 cents some places. And so it seemed reasonable that you could now use the same kind of keyword based targeting in session, use that first party data as the rule for the ad match, and then serve that ad. And that worked incredibly well for click-through rates. And so to your point around Shopper, Todd, what we ended up doing is we ended up using that technology to drive a lot of traffic for brands into their shopper marketing pages on places like Walmart.com or Target.com or others, because what they want is traffic, and they want ultimately in people to purchase the product. And so,
what time frame are we thinking about at this point?
This is 2012, and yeah, it's funny. You might remember Triad.
Yep.
They were a huge shopper company, so they were one of our first customers buying our media. And
right, because you were working with the publishers, right,
yes.
not retailers, and effectively driving, right, this would be like what retailers are now starting to do with audience, like YieldBot being too early. All these RMNs now doing offsite audience targeting, YieldBot would have been like one of the perfect go-tos for them.
Oh,
and
no
for those
question.
not aware, YieldBot ultimately shut down. It was one of those classic examples of being early is still wrong. They were early by about 5 to 8 years. Because again, with audience extension now as a key component of retail media, it would have been a perfect partner to.
Yeah, so I'm laughing because I was at Quotient, and that was right after Triad had their day in the sun. Quotient came in as basically an audience extension provider to retailers that didn't have a ton of traffic. So
yeah, we talked to the corp dev team at Quotient a bit. They were smart. They saw the opportunity for us. It didn't end up working. Actually, I think the guy left. That we had was our main point of contact there. But absolutely, it was definitely ahead of its time. But the value was there for the publishers and for the brands. Our largest customer was Meredith, now Dotdash, which of course is doing something similar now. They've developed a product that basically creates keywords based on site session behavior and contextual signals on the page and all the stuff that we did back then.
One of the guys over there at Dotdash running it is Pat from Xandr, and that ties that together too in terms of his background in programmatic and probably his familiarity with what you guys are doing.
Yeah, we didn't do programmatic. That was part of the challenge. And that was actually part of why I ended up leaving is because we didn't want to take third-party data. We only wanted to use our data. We only wanted to use our tags. We wanted direct relationships with the publishers.
Nowadays, that's all just first look, right? And again, this is the early part of the business is programmatic, and the idea of like header bidding would have allowed you to do programmatic the way you wanted to do it. That
we did do header bidding. In fact, we did header bidding before.
That's the point is, right, you were before header bidding and had access to publishers en masse to do first look and then do first party matching on first look and bid on that, right? That was the missing piece. You were having to invent what we now call header bidding to do what you wanted to do. And again, being early is still wrong. Today, it would be a lot easier to do those things.
We used to front run Google. We used to be able to get our bids in before Google. And because our average CPMs were about $3, we could get any impression we wanted. And again, going back to just keyword-based matching and the importance of words to understand the context or intent of somebody, that was a very powerful combination for us. And and a company like Meredith, which has lots of intent-driven content, recipes. I remember All Recipes, Seattle company, Todd, was one of our huge. Yeah, it's one of our biggest partners. I think we paid them millions of dollars of revenue. And again, back to shopper, right? So who were the brands that wanted people to get driven to all recipes. There was the McCormick Spices of the world, and Tyson Chicken was a big one. And so, yeah, that world is it's fascinating to see what has happened with retail media networks. Yeah, I left because there was a lot of the board really wanted to take the business into the programmatic space and find programmatic partners. We had tried to work with the trade desk early on, and it just the tech wasn't going to work really well. And
2016 programmatic landscape is very different than 2024. I think that's one of the things that people miss. Having since I sold Samantha to Outbrain in 2017, the things you can do today with programmatic are so much more advanced. And again, with the rise of first party to replace third party, and the rise of header bidding, right? That rise of header bidding really changes the landscape around first party targeting and bidding and selling, right? In a way that's very dramatic. And I think actually, because one of the things we've talked about has been the rise of retail media, but it's not rise in the sense of it's new. It's been a part of the landscape in calling different things. It was called co-op, then it was called shopper marketing, and now it's called retail media. But and I think the question that we've been looking at, which is why is retail media in its current form, like digital retail media, really started to explode? And I think some of the pieces that start to appear in the landscape are things like header bidding that really starts to take that off. It's like YieldBot was doing a lot of audience extension type work in 2012 to 2016, 17. And that was leading edge at the time. And today would be standard fare. And if you're a smaller retailer, you really need offsite targeting to achieve the scale to make campaign sales work. And so I think that's when we put the pieces together, the rise of header bidding really changes the landscape and enables this kind of, and one of the pieces that enables this kind of new form of retail media.
And the other thing I would say is the thread going back full circle is first party data. That's obviously a huge part of retail media. So being able to understand that these are who these customers are when they're on site, and that they're real people.
Right.
There's a lot of first party. Again, it's a big area where data fidelity is important and helps performance.
It's very big on the measurement side, making sure you're tying back to a real person, you're closing the loop and all of that. I think what gets missed between that 2016 period to 2024 is that technology improved over that time. And this is why I thought it would be interesting. Todd has been.
I'm not sure I know about that because I left ad tech and got back into art tech.
No, but I think that's what's interesting is that because we are moving away from it being super keyword focused to a world of LLMs and AI, we had to hold on to these keywords as the messenger of intent. And I think that we're moving past that to a better contextual understanding. We're now ready to talk about what is Neuralift and tell us that part of the journey.
Yeah. So after YieldBot, I started, because I, again, was not on board with the programmatic future of YieldBot, I went and started what I wanted YieldBot to become was a CDP for publishers. And so when I left YieldBot, I started building CDPs for retailers, not for publishers.
So what was the original promise of, because I think this is going to be part of the theme, and whatever we call this episode is going to be about like a CDP, a customer data platform, was supposed to do something. And it really hasn't.
Yep.
So I would like to see.
Oh, yeah. I say that all the time. You have a CDP, so what? What do you do with it? It's a glorified data warehouse, which is then now why the data warehouse space, this rise of composable CDPs, which is basically just various components of the CDP put together with the data warehouse, because the first party data needs to be a source of truth and it needs to have a home. It needs what they call kind of gravity. It's got to live somewhere as a source of truth. And you don't want it in all these different databases. In fact, that's why CDPs became interesting. The idea originally of CDP is to take data from all these different tools that had their own tags and bring that together, unify that around a single ID, entity resolution or identity resolution. So you could see this vision of a customer 360. You could start to see the same customer across all these different tools, where previously you had that same customer with its own ID in 4 or 5 different tools. You had them in your A/B testing tool, you had them in your email tool, you had them in your site targeting tool, you had them in all different places. And thus, you had the same customer segmented differently in all of these different places, which prevents you from actually speaking to that customer the same way across all the touch points, which is how you.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is like
what brands want to do.
we've been talking so much about it, the rise of retail media. The rise of retail media basically keeps the brands in the dark, and they don't have the power to be able to say, hey, I actually know a lot about this customer.
Yes, there is a little, I'll give you a little rub there, because a lot of the buyers of retail media are CPGs, and they don't have the first party relationship with their customers. So they need somebody to come along like a Walmart to say, hey, we know who your customers are, or Amazon, right? And we talk about retail media networks. We know that those are far and away.
Absolutely. No, Amazon,
Yeah.
Walmart are the one and
The two big ones. And they know who those customers are, and they know what they buy. And the CPG brands don't. And I think they're trying.
Do the CPG brands not know because they haven't invested properly in things like CDPs, or they just don't know?
They haven't invested properly in first party data collection. So you think
But it's
about
hard for them. Like the retail,
I think
the
I'll give you an
transaction
example.
still will live at the retail. This is the last episode we just had about Nike overshooting themselves, trying to be half direct to consumer. That's very hard. Unilever and PG can't do that. They don't have P&G stores.
No, they can't, but they can collect data. Brands go back to the Columbia House Record and Tapes, where you sent in your penny and you got 11 albums and you gave them your name and address, right? And they knew who you are, they knew where you lived, they knew what kind of music you're interested in. Coca-Cola has done really well with this in building and creating programs all around first party data collection, contests, giveaways. So there's lots of ways to do it. And to at least get enough of a data set where you can begin to model against.
Right.
So if you had a certain percentage of first party IDs, and then had the rest of your data in terms of sales data, which you have as a CPG, what's selling where, you could start to build really good models to do that. But I think most of the CPG brands are very far behind. I know we've been talking to them, a few of them, very far behind in first party data collection. And so that's a huge challenge for them still. But brands on the other types of brands and other verticals, it's abundant.
Interesting that CPG is that far behind versus other categories. What do you think, to your point, what are some of the categories you think have done the best in terms of collecting first party data?
Travel hospitality is a great one. If you think about all of the programs around that reward frequency, that's a great vertical. Anything online with regards to retail that's transactional or retail or transactional has done a good job. And obviously apps, anything, there's a lot of companies that have done well. Game is another really great vertical for first party data with an abundance of it. So there are others that are not, as sports and entertainment as a vertical that we're active in at Neuralift, and it's a little behind, I would say, these other vertical. They don't, you buy your ticket, but you buy your ticket through a ticketing company.
Right.
The arena and the team may or may not know who you are. And in fact, the ticket companies have built their own data businesses these days.
I think everyone with a transaction attached to it has built a data business.
Yes. Yeah, as well they should. And again, that gets back to the first party relationship, which again wasn't important. Arenas were happy to have companies sell their tickets on their behalf. I'm not sure they read the fine print that says that data belongs to the ticketing company. And now I think some of those contracts may be changed going forward, because this is first party data is the backbone for, I just think first party data is the most important data for any business to have to win. It's in a competitive environment, the best first party data will win.
So when we were talking previously, you had some examples of what a brand can do to use the data that they have, or even use the data that a publisher or retailer might have. And the order of operations matters. You don't just take a big dump of data, you segment first. So tell us a little more about Neuralift's value proposition and how does that work?
Yeah. So Neuralift's value proposition is the answer to I have a CDP. So what? I have a customer 360 So what? What are you doing with it? How are you growing your business with your data? That seemed to be the missing piece. And I took an interim role as a chief digital officer where I felt this every day. We had a CDP, we had Google Analytics 4 installed, we had Google Cloud Platform, we had Snowflake, we had a CRM. So we had all of the data in the world, but nobody was able to say who our customers were, how they should be segmented. And as I tried to, because my charter was to come in and improve conversion rate, the first thing I do is ask for customer segmentation. And okay, now I have to put a ticket in Jira. I have to write an epic. It goes to the shared data team. I get in a food fight for prioritization across every other data need in the entire organization. And 3 months later, I get something back. And data is a motorsport. There is no 3 months later. The playing field has changed. That data, that segmentation is probably worthless or certainly not accurate based on the changes that have happened over a whole quarter in the business. So I thought that this was a perfect problem for AI to solve since the data is there. The issue is time to value from the data and precision from the data. And so those are two things that AI does incredibly well. AI processes really fast, and there are no limits to the amount of data that can be processed, in fact. And so we could take a table at Neuralift of 20 million customers and 800 columns and precisely segment that table in a few hours. That's months and months of work for a data team to be able, as a brand, to have that done incredibly accurately, more accurately than humans could do it, from months to basically minutes of time. The time to value there to action on that data while it's still relevant and important is a huge benefit to the brand, as well as the precision. Using all of the data to create segments rather than saying, hey, having some person say these 5 features in the data are important to build our model for segmentation. That introduces lots of bias. It's usually the highest paid person in the room gets to determine what data is being used.
I think when we first talked about this, it was, oh, sweet. So there's no challenges there. You just a no-brainer. You just sell it right in.
I think what's interesting here is and for our listeners, Jonathan has given us a demo of Neuralift. And when you see it and how it segments users, it definitely opens your eyes like, oh, totally. When he talks about the old-fashioned way of doing SQL joins, and you had to guess what those joins should be and what the segments would be, that's how you made segments. You'd make a segment. Did it actually work? That segment didn't actually produce any marketing results. I guess that's the wrong segment. Let's try it again and again. And so that would take years because it was like once a quarter is all you could do is segment someone.
Yeah, it's a matching problem.
Yeah, and then Neuralift shows up and its ability to use AI to look at a data set and create the segments in hours without a lot of human intervention changes the game of how data becomes accessible and manageable. I think that's another thing that's worth talking about, Jonathan, which is that you talked about the timeline when you were a CDO and how hard it was to get segments is unless you've tried to do that, it is hard to understand how painful it is to try to execute on a data strategy.
Yeah, what we've tried to do is combine two things. The first is the neural network that we've built that actually does the segmentation. And so that is to precisely segment a table based on affinity in the entire data set. So we are looking across the data to find the patterns that are important to create segments. We don't have any bias. Before we do the run, we don't determine we don't know how many segments there will be. We don't know how large the biggest segment will be or the smallest segment, although we do have a minimum segment size that's programmable. We default to 1,000 for use cases around custom audiences in Meta and Snap and TikTok, etc. But the first thing we do is we have this neural network to do the precise segmentation. I think what's really interesting that's the way the platforms, that's the way they're doing. There's no one at Google or Meta sitting there once you put your campaign in and saying, oh, let me SQL query our table of Meta users and create the best lookalike audience. No, that's not how it works.
You mean they're not handpicking from a customer list of 1.2 billion users? Stop.
Right. Exactly. So we bring that same power to a brand to be able to segment. But the other thing we do that I think is really novel and that most people really get excited about is once we have those segments done, we've created a number of generative outputs to explain the segments, what we call reasoning and explainability. So we show you with the metrics that the neural network create, and oftentimes these are benchmarks or metrics that the brand has not even done themselves with their own analytics, but we present them and we show that these are the key data that created the segment, and use large language models to explain that to even an intern would understand who these segments are, why they've been created, who's in the segment, and what's relevant to them.
I hear that, and I'm like, I look back to the Blue Kai days. Is it better than just margarita drinking empty nesters? Like what all those like segment names, which are hilarious to read. Is the answer like more than just a title?
The answer, Tom, is always more margaritas. Yes, it's more than a title. The titles. This is something LLMs do incredibly well, right? And we've created the prompts so that the titles are memorable, but they're based on the underlying data of why the segment is brought together. But what's really important is the distinctions between the segments, and that's where. And the other thing I'll say that we do that's important is we allow the brands to overlay their own KPIs on top of the segments. And that's all in the UI, and that's part of the data process and that we do. So the KPIs can be now seen across the segments that the brand has, which surfaces immediate opportunities for strategies and where they should be investing their time and resources. If you see a segment that's underperforming for, let's say, average order value, that's incredibly important. To get that type of information in minutes to hours from a giant table is invaluable to a brand. And for us, it's all not only is it optimization of the end result to lift the KPI, but it's the optimization of the time and investments that go in that these brands have to just operate and get marketing that is going to perform.
So does this fix some of the dumb KPIs that you used to see? I remember you telling us about a cruise line. Let's hear some war stories about how you got to where you are.
Well, in case anyone's listening, I want to be a little careful about every company has bad KPIs. But I think that this shows you what I think Neuralift does incredibly well is just understanding what's relevant to whom. Todd mentioned the matching problem before. Optimization is a matching problem. So to understand what I have to show to this group, and that's different than what you have to show to this group. That's what we did at Informatica back in the day, and that's what we're doing with Neuralift almost 20 years later. It's what all ads are trying to do, right? We're trying to match something we think that will be interesting to somebody. If it's interesting, they'll notice it. If they notice it, they'll take action about it. If it's relevant, this is basic advertising 101. It's just now we have data to do it, and now we have AI to accelerate how it's done and to do it more optimally.
I think going back to the point about KPIs and appropriateness of which are what, I think from an ad and marketing perspective, we as marketers have had to lean into the best available KPI, even if it's still garbage. And click-through rates or engagements, view through conversions. God, that's probably the worst KPI ever invented.
Well, any KPI, Todd, that was invented by an agency is a bad KPI.
There's a good take. Let's drive over we're just throwing the agencies under the bus here. The body's getting squished as the wheels turn. Kabump, kabump.
Yeah, it sounded like a few of those are agency-derived KPIs or ancillary ad services KPIs. I think the one I've ragged on a little bit lately is attention. We're going to be measuring attention now. And I think advertising is there to sell people on a product, and there's a place for brand, there's a place for performance, and they all have their KPIs. But at the end of the day, if your advertising should be growing your business, and if it's not working and your investments are not returning ROI, I think I've always been more on the performance side because that's one of the great parts of digital marketing. I go back to the beginning of why I loved search. Search was the greatest and still is the greatest demand capture technology ever created. There's demand gen, and I don't think search is great at demand gen. I think social's done a pretty good job of that as far as digital goes. But right. I still think television and CTV and outdoor, and there are other great ways to create awareness and generate demand. But the other side of it is capturing the demand. And that is something that digital has always done incredibly well because of the experience. It's just so easy. It's become easier and easier. Now I can just click on a button and one click buy, or Apple Pay. It makes it so easy to purchase and to transact And I think that that's a hugely underrated part of digital's impact. Obviously, we see it on companies like Amazon, and we see it in the market cap of Google and Meta. But I think overall, it's not appreciated enough that digital is demand capture, and other channels are really good at demand gen.
Yeah, I think the
So I
reason we
think
were trying to push in that direction was that I think you told us a story about how dropping into the checkout flow might be not the right way
Oh,
to measure whether or not you're being successful.
I will.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of gaming. Let's just say I've seen a lot of people game metrics, and I think that's and KPIs. And two lessons there. One, your marketing org should all be pointed to a North Star KPI, and everybody should be focused on improving that KPI. And probably it should be conversion or order value or something that could be measured very clearly and succinctly. Lifetime value is a great metric, much harder to measure, takes a lot of time.
But
You know, that's
you're, as Neuralift, on that side of the brand who potentially could actually know the LTV, whether they
yeah.
figured it out or not. The retailer has a
Yep.
tougher time with that because they don't actually care as much. They want aggregate increase in value per category, but the brand specifically could have that LTV understanding. And
Yeah.
I don't know where that's at today because
Well,
I've
it's
heard
funny because
it on
you're talking about you were talking about Nike, and they bought a company called Zodiac back in the day that was specifically focused on being able to determine and predict LTV of customers based on their behaviors and their transactions. And I don't know what ended up happening to the company. I always admired it quite a bit, but I don't know. I
no,
haven't
I'm happy I
haven't felt
asked because I
what I find on marketing teams when I go in and work with them is that generally speaking, the email team has KPIs like open rate or click through rate or things like that. And the product team has something related to add products added to cart or time on site or return visits or things like that. And but there's nothing that kind of puts it all together. And so this is one of the issues I found is that leaders, CMOs, SVPs, they are struggling strategically. And the reason they're struggling strategically is that the teams that they have are all focused very tactically and they're comped tactically as well. And so part of what we wanted to do at Neuralift was say, okay, let's take a step back for a second. Your biggest problems are not tactics. Tactics are there. You know what you could do. There's the channels you have. You know how to leverage the channels well at this point. What you're deficient in is understanding based on your data, right? Your data should drive your strategy. And there's no product or tool that I've seen that does that. And so what we've done is say, okay, give us all of your data and let us show you top down, who your customers are. And there, once you understand that, the strategies become emergent themselves. It's there in the data. You have groups of people who are performing differently, are interested in different things, buy at different times, churn different rates. Like all of these things are right there in front of you where strategies are easy to develop. And I think that was the big thing as I went in and got the idea for Neuralift was that seemed to be missing to me in the market. And that seemed to be a perfect use of AI. And that was why we started playing around with Neuralift and eventually did some initial, built an alpha, built a beta, started working with some brands and seeing that, yeah, like everybody was very excited at these C-level to start to get this level of detailed data-driven insights on their customers. Because again, these are the people that have approved the millions of dollars that went into buying the data infrastructure and tools and have waited 6 to 12 months of an implementation to finally be able to use it and are sitting there and saying, so what? Where's the ROI? How are we going to use all this investment? And so I think it's fortunate the timing with AI now will be able to unlock those investments.
One of the interesting things about your story and the journey is the focus on first party data. And in many ways, YieldBot was early. Offermatica begins to show us that value. And I've actually started talking about we should stop calling them retail media networks because what's happening is anyone who has logged in users or transaction data is now launching retail media. And I said we should call it either a first party network because that's really what's driving it. And now that now the rest of the ecosystem with header bidding out, that makes that easier to leverage that data. But really, to me, retail media is about the rise of logged in users, about the rise of first party targeting. And so we're really seeing the first party revolution. And so it's in many ways, the world is catching up with you
But
now.
we're coming full circle.
Yeah, we're coming full circle, right? I'm fascinated about this too, right? And to your point about conversions as a better Uber metric or North Star metric, the benefit of retail media or retailers is they have that, like they have a real conversion, not like a fake conversion, not some implied conversion. They actually have a checkout transactional event that they can look to. And that I think is an important aspect of this that helps people understand it. Now, to your point of, oh, you've invested all this money in starting to capture data and you can't actually use it. If you're doing SQL joins that take a quarter to do any rev of it, it's horrible. Versus the ability to have someone come along like you and Neuralift to say, okay, how do I segment users so I can actually take advantage of all these new first party opportunities even outside of, and the good news from a marketer's perspective is the rise of this first party ecosystem means you maybe start to unlock channels outside of Meta and Google.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, you could be more efficient in those big channels because if you have precise
Right.
segments that will feed a custom audience, that's the seed, right, data set that they're doing their modeling against. So you want that group of IDs to be as high in affinity and similar as possible to get the highest resolution of the modeling that the platforms are doing. So that helps you perform better there. But to your point, yeah, I think one of the things I think, and when I talk to CMOs, is the challenge that they have, and I alluded to earlier, which is they see their customers across all the touch points. It's not
Right.
just channel specific.
Right.
And this is one of the, again, going back to one of the problems in marketing now is everybody's everything, strategies are channel specific, tactics are channel specific. The customer doesn't think in channels. The customer is walking into your store. The customer is goes to your website. The customer might have your app. The customer sees you in search. Like you need to see cross channel. And I think one of the amazing things about CDPs is that they've aggregated this data together across channels and unified it. But again, okay, so now what are we going to do with it? If we start to start to see segments of our audience or customers across channels, that is incredibly powerful for a CMO in terms of understanding where to make investments, how to talk to people the right way, which people are important to me, which people are not. Some customers are just not, shouldn't have the levels of investment of other customers in terms of whatever it is, marketing, resources, programs, coupons. So how are you going to treat people differently? Well, you have to know who they are. And so I think that this is a progression. The way I've looked at, again, being very involved, having built CDPs, being very involved in that world, especially as it's moved to composable and data warehouse. To me, the next progression is, okay, now let's take that data set and start to see our customers in a much more intelligent way that will drive our business forward.
One thing we also like to talk about is maybe as a good closing topic, which is what's your vision of the future, right? For first party, for CDPs, for this, what does that look like in 3 to 5 years? How does the world change? And obviously you're trying to help that with Neuralift in your efforts. So what's your prediction for the future of the world that you're living in?
That's a great question. I think more automation, more precision, faster time to value. I'm very long AI. We're doing work in Snowflake with Gentive AI company for activation. I think that's incredibly fascinating. Going from a data set that is in the warehouse to automated segment and audience creation to automated activation and even automated reporting back of measurements. Now you have CAPIs, right? So you can close the loop on things. So insights, suggestions about this budget should be increased, or if we increase this budget, this will have this effect to conversion rate or volume, or these kinds of things are all going to be drawn out by AI. So I think it's a really exciting time. Again, it will only be as good. The thing that never changes, it's only as good as your underlying data, right? Everything you do, it's the old garbage in, garbage out. That never goes away. But the capabilities, especially with higher fidelity data, are going to continue to expand. They're continue to be automated and which will again make things faster and more precise. And I think for marketers, Those are key things. Precision and speed in marketing that's how you win. If you could do something faster than your competition, if you could do something more accurately than your competition, you're gonna get market share. And if you know something about customers before your competition, you're going to get market share. So I think that's going to be really quite something over the next 5 years. And even being able to, I don't want to say reverse engineer, but gain more insight from the platforms based on the data that they give you back, based on performance, based on the types of ad groups or audiences and products that you're selling. I think AI is going to help there tremendously too. So it's an exciting time. I think we're going to have it'll be rocky because there'll be a lot of folks who will be very scared of technology and progress, as there always is. But there's no question everything is moving there, and obviously the hyperscalers are pushing all of this as well. So for enterprise, this is really important, and because they have the most data, they'll stand to benefit the most.
Great. Thank you again for joining us on The Middlemen. Really enjoyed this, and we're going to have to think about a lot what you talked about the future. I think I need to process it a bit, so excited to do that.
I'll process it on GPUs. NVIDIA will be happy to download your thought. You get the Neuralink and get to download your thoughts right
Oh, now I understand the name of the company. Yeah, okay, very good. All right, we'll see you next time.
Thank you, fellas.
I'm talking